technology does well is, make things really efficient. And when that happens, you get these sort of, pools, for lack of a better word, where sort of everyone sort of, gravitates to what is working. And I actually think that, part of, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but part of what is happening is that because there isn't this clear path, right? So in the past, you sort of had the rules for if you wanted to be a professional musician, where you sort of went, X, Y, and Z. You tried to get signed to a label and did these things. And if you didn't, you weren't a musician for the most part, right? And now, of course, there's a lot more options, but the rules are a lot less clear. And so the amount of options that you have is sort of very, very large, and that's actually very, very confusing, and in a lot of cases very, very scary, because you don't know what you need to do. So people experiment in very different ways, but I think a lot of the concern that I see isn't necessarily generational, but is people who just want someone to say, here's the path, right? So here's what, if I want to be a successful musician, or if I want to be a success, I want to be able to, follow these steps. And if I succeed, I succeed. If I don't succeed, I don't succeed. The problem is, I don't know what that is today. And so when you see something that starts to be a little successful, like, iTunes, that's not a little successful, but, big successful, and then Spotify and things like that, then suddenly everyone sort of focuses on that as that is the solution. Right. And therefore, if that alone is not replacing the old system, suddenly then they get really, really concerned and say, well, I bet everything on Spotify, and then I get my check, and it's 8 cents. Right. That's a problem. And so I think that is part of the I wouldn't say that's an educational gap, but I think it's part of the gap that needs to be dealt with, just in terms of the mental, getting over that hump of recognizing that none of these guys are going to replace the old way of doing things. And for many musicians, that's probably better. For a small group, maybe it's worse. But yeah.
Oh no, I was going to say, this kind of goes back to the artist as entrepreneur, because after, I've been through this period the last couple of months thinking about this stuff, and I decided in the end that everything's still fine. And that it's, whatever the just like you said, the press is like always, what is the story? What is the new story? And that's what, makes the news. So I'll still continue to sort of be an advocate for this like other road over here, but I decided that it's okay. And that going back to this idea of like artists, they just want to see like what is the roadmap. And I think that really is kind of the crux of the problem right there. And so like I never had any expectation of a roadmap, and I've said before, if the doors are closed, make your own building. Like that's sort of like my motto for life. So that's how I'll operate. Whereas like if suddenly streaming closes some door, then I'll just make another building to make some more money in. And so I do think that there is kind of like a slight shift that needs to happen in artists' mind, that is kind of how the world is now. And that's not just in music, that's in everything else.
Well, I mean, I've made this semi-joke that like, musicians, at some point in training to be a musician, you learn how to improvise mostly. And that I think it's important for them to learn to improvise on the business side as well. And this recognition that you have to just sort of keep trying stuff and keep doing a lot of different things, and which is the same thing that any entrepreneur goes through. I mean, you talk to any entrepreneur, you'll probably never find a single entrepreneur who said that they started a company with X idea and then they executed exactly on that. And what finally came out, even what was released, maybe months or a year later, is almost always very, very different than what the idea was that they start with. And then the iterations after that, it just keeps changing and changing and changing, because you're always kind of iterating to figure out what works and doing new things and different things. And I think that needs to be true for musicians as well, in this world, is recognizing that it's this sort of constant improvisation in terms of, well, let's try this and let's go there and see if that works. And if it doesn't, well, don't do that again, but let's try something different. And I think that's challenging for everyone. It's challenging for entrepreneurs, and it's challenging for artists, but I think it's also really scary, when you don't know what that path is. And so figuring out how do you get around that is a challenge. And so one point on that I think, the thing that I think has worked for entrepreneurs, at least, to get over that, is just seeing more and more success stories and hearing those stories being told and seeing like, this company started as something entirely different, but changed along the way and did this, and now it looks like something completely different. And there are a lot of those stories out there, and they spread, and that's that's sort of part of the lore of Silicon Valley. Almost any company you look at started as something completely different. With artists, there are some stories out there, the success stories. I mean, poster child, whatever it is, where people can look at that. And I've definitely heard from artists who see stories of the do-it-yourself successes and say that inspires them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if those stories are as pervasive as it is in the entrepreneurial world.
Right. Well, that's a call to action there. I've been trying to really encourage other artists to be public with their income, just to kind of talk publicly a little bit more about things. Post blogs, just talk about this. You can't. Nobody's going to make the world fit you if they don't know what your world is. So like even if they were going to just make the world fit you, but so I really feel like sometimes I feel like the only person out there talking about it. There's a few more, but I feel like you have to sort of drag artists kicking and screaming.
But I think that kind of transparency is valuable as well. Just in not only is it sharing and sort of helping other artists, but I think it in many ways helps fans kind of understand you as well, and
Sure.
make them more supportive of you when they understand those things.
Right.
Yeah, I think anything that educates the consumers of music to how to be better consumers, to better support you, is for the ones that really want to be part of this, I think it can only be good. Whether or not people listen, we can't control for, but the more that you get the understanding that you can have, as we all now want to have this personal connection with, whether it's brands or particular artists or companies, whatever this millennial generation idea of that is, the more that personal connection is built, now that we have the tools to do that, getting more good information out there is only one of the good things.
There are, at the same time though, it's definitely not a safe thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of artists who tend to, there is kind of a tradition of like, if artists start talking about finances and money and economics, people say shut up and make music, and that I think, again, because I've sort of grown up in this era, I'm used to the idea of like comments and arguments, and it's fun, and I love a good debate. But I was thinking about the band Grizzly Bear, who had tweeted to their fans like, if you want to help us, the best thing you can do is buy an album, and that sparked like this whole online discussion about how wrong that was. And it was a big discussion. I was like, wow, that was pretty interesting. I think they were just not prepared for it, and there was kind of like silence on their end. Like,
I think that is a challenge where if you are going to be open and transparent, is that there's backlash. And we were also talking before about the Amanda Palmer situation, where which actually gets another thing, which is sort of the rise of Kickstarter in terms of being or similar platforms as being important in this space, but which has some benefits of additional transparency. I mean, you can see how much is raised and in what ways, which is sort of a different aspect to these things, but also then leads to potential backlash, such as everyone knows the backlash that happened with Amanda Palmer.
Is anybody who doesn't know about it?
Yeah, anyone not know? Oh. we have a couple. So the very, very quick version, she raised like over $1 million on Kickstarter. It was a big deal. And then when she went on tour, one of the things was that she asked for volunteers to play a few songs on stage with her. And there was a big uproar about whether or not that was appropriate, considering that she had raised over $1 million. Should she have then just hired musicians to be on stage? No, she had a band. There's a lot of other aspects to it. But it created sort of this big discussion, and eventually she did agree to pay the volunteers, even though some of them, I guess, were just like, no, we're happy to be volunteers. We just want to be on stage with you. That's cool. But it leads to this sort of, there's this sort of interesting challenge of when you are open and transparent, and then if you go from a situation where, there may be this inflection point where you can start with no money and then everyone wants to support you, and then if you have a lot, is there a problem? And one of the things that I saw, I think that there's sort of this standard line that like, the kids today, don't want to support musicians because they think they're all rich, and I don't think that's true. I think that's sort of this weird myth that got out there, and some people will say that maybe just about like certain rock stars or whatever, but then you see these stories like when Amanda raised over $1 million, the people who bought into it were absolutely thrilled and were excited. There was a big party, and people were like, they felt it was almost validating them as well, the fact that they would support an artist who could then raise over $1 million. We saw the same thing in sort of the comedy world with Louis C.K., who raised over $1 million by selling his comedy special for $5, and people were absolutely thrilled that he made $1 million in less than 2 weeks. And so I think that. But there is that fine line where it's like everyone is thrilled up to a certain point when they think you're misusing the money.
Yeah, it might be about sort of like as long as the artist is still, doing the right thing in the eyes of their fans. Like as soon as like they start acting potentially like the man, then it all falls down.
But this also, I think, this goes to you releasing percentages from your tax return too. Yeah. And we were talking about this before about, well, I made this 18% from from performance, but that's the lowest margin that I've got. So, you can make $1 million, but okay, how much of that was spent on gas for the van to get to the venue in Raleigh to play the show, and how much of that went into so everybody hears $1 million and goes, oh, that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. That's so great. She made all this money and now she's doing this. And what you don't hear is, but then I had to, I had to put gas in this rickety old van and do that kind of thing. And it's like, okay, you're supporting people, and it's an interesting use of wording in terms of raised $1 million. Like Louis C.K. raised $1 million. Amanda Palmer they made $1 million. They went out and this is their job, and people paid them for a service. In Louis C.K., it's laughing your ass off. In Amanda Palmer, it's really good music. It's paying for that. Okay. No, she's
a friend.
I shouldn't say that at a music conference.
Amanda's a good friend, so her music is good. She sells an experience. I was going to say.
Okay, so she sells that's even better. She sells an experience. That's a good way.
But I think that to some extent, right? I mean, that's what a lot of creativity is today. I think that's true of a lot of successful artists in almost any field, is that they're selling an experience.